Welcome to SpringLaw's Spring Forward Legal Updates webinar series. This series is designed to provide a comprehensive legal overview of key issues related to employment law and human rights in Ontario. SpringLaw is a virtual employment law firm advising on workplace legal issues for employers, employees, freelancers, and executives from a wide range of industries. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar and find it useful and informative. To reach our team, please visit us at springlaw.ca. And now to our presenters.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Spring Forward Legal Updates monthly webinar series. Today is the second of our 2020 monthly webinars, and the topic is mental health in the workplace, considerations in the era of COVID-19. We have a large number of people attending the webinar today, and we're very excited to take your questions and answer them as well as we can. My name is Danielle Murray, one of the lawyers at SpringLaw, and joining me today is Hilary Page. If you are one of our clients, you already know we are employment and contract lawyers at our virtual law firm based out of Ontario. If you are new to our law firm community, welcome. Feel free to ask questions through the chat function throughout the webinar, and download our slides under the Handouts tab. Finally, for more information on our law firm, please visit our website at springlaw.ca, where we have a variety of resources there, including our award-winning weekly blog posts, a link to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, information about our innovative subscription program for employers, and our ebook for employees recently fired and looking for an alternative to in-person legal services.
And we thought we would start off today just before we dive in by running a poll. So this is a new thing for us on the webinar, but we thought it would be good to get a little bit of information from everybody watching about sort of what their pain points are. So Jess, if you could run the polls now. We have, oh, here we go, 2 questions. So, and we're just wondering, who's attending? Are you an employer or an employee? And I think we could probably switch to the next question. Or I guess I'll leave that to our behind the scenes people to decide when enough people have answered. The webinar today is just half an hour. So we do try to keep it to half an hour, and we will try to have some time to answer your questions. And these are issues that we're going to touch on throughout the webinar, but we're just curious from the attendees about, what the main pain points are. Okay. So it seems like most people are concerned about employee burnout. So we'll definitely touch on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good to know.
And we've got 75% employers, 25% employees with us today. So welcome, everybody. And I guess
Thanks.
back to you, Danielle, to do the roadmap.
Yeah, sure. So our presentation today is mostly geared towards employers, but it definitely does address employee concerns as well. And, feel free to ask questions at the end if there's time. So impacts of COVID-19 in the workplace and workplace mental health. We know by now that COVID-19 has had significant impacts on mental health and definitely workplace mental health. And so we're going to touch on that. We're going to address addressing mental health in the workplace. So how employers can address that and how employers can also encourage a positive workplace. So impacts of COVID-19 in workplace mental health. There are various effects. What we're seeing a lot in just speaking to clients is that in both employers and employees are experiencing anxiety and depression, burnout, stress, and uncertainty about the future. These are unprecedented times, and people are dealing with family situations at home. People are experiencing financial impacts, not necessarily used to working from home, and workers may have family issues that they're dealing with on top of work issues. So it's definitely had a big impact on both employees and employers. Some situations that we've heard of recently is, for example, when employees are working from home and employers, to fact, are working from home as well. Sometimes, employers can feel the impact of that and just get stressed about that. And the result is, in a situation I've heard of recently where an employee was constantly getting phone calls from the employer asking, what are you doing? What are you doing now? What are you working on? Are you working? Why isn't this done yet? And for the employee, it gets increasingly stressful to the point where it was causing anxiety, and the employee was afraid to leave her seat or her desk. And it actually ended up in a leave. So she ended up taking a month off, a month unpaid leave. So a stress leave. And then that can really impact, productivity and, work output. And we'll talk about, how to manage that and how to avoid that later on. We've also heard about situations where employees are busy. So if a company's doing well during COVID-19 and its employees are very busy and are working from home while having kids at home and no childcare, and how that's causing employee burnout. And we'll talk about, addressing that as well. But that's been a serious issue. Also, working at the office has brought challenges as well. It's if employees are at risk of contracting the virus, or if they're commuting and if they're vulnerable themselves, or they have someone at home who's vulnerable, that can cause mental health issues. And finally, layoffs, or if employees are on layoff, or the Infectious Disease Emergency Leave, which is still in effect, that can have a significant impact on employee morale and employee mental health. If just the uncertainty of not knowing if they're going to be recalled or when they're going to be recalled, combined with the financial stress and isolation. So definitely seeing a lot of impacts, or a big impact, in the workplace mental health.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about accommodating mental health concerns in the workplace and encouraging a positive workplace. And I do see we've got a question come in here. Someone is interested in exploring accommodation of mental health issues with reduced hours of work or limited productivity. So we will chat about that for sure. Mm-hmm. So when an employee is maybe not functioning at their utmost level, this may invoke human rights concerns, right? And that the employer has a duty to accommodate up to a point of undue hardship. If you could just switch slides there, Danielle. So the employer has a duty to accommodate anything that might invoke a human rights protection up to the point of undue hardship. And undue hardship is a very high bar. So generally, undue hardship will not be made out if the accommodation would require the employer to spend more money, or if the employee would be less productive. Those are kind of the normal reasons we might see for concerns about accommodating, and those won't meet the undue hardship standard typically. So let's say you have an employee who is saying, I can't work my full hours because I have to take care of children. And this could invoke the Infectious Disease Emergency Leave job protection as well, but it also invokes the Human Rights Code, and this would be something that might attract family status protection under the Human Rights Code. So the employer in that case needs to work with the employee to figure out how the employee can be accommodated. So a couple of things that I like to say about accommodation is it's not up to the employee what the accommodation will be. So it's not that the employee gets to choose their accommodation. The employee can be a partner in discussing that, but the employer also has quite a lot of control. And the employee should generally be providing some sort of evidence or proof that they do need this accommodation. So this is the first you even heard that they have a child and they're saying that their daycare is closed and therefore they can't work their full hours. It would be reasonable for the employer to request some sort of evidence of that. So like a letter from the daycare, for example. When we have someone who's saying, I can't work full hours because of a disability related concern, or I can't come into the office because I'm high risk and I would have to take the TTC, and I have this condition that makes me high risk. That's something that an employer can request, can and should request proof of. So some sort of medical evidence, a letter from a doctor, a functional abilities form, something to that extent. So employers need to be on the lookout for human rights concerns that might crop up. An employer can be found to have failed to accommodate an employee even when the employee didn't tell the employer that they needed accommodation. So the employer does have a positive duty to inquire. So if you notice that an employee is struggling or not able to work their full hours or something like that, as the employer, you do have a duty to look into that and determine what's up with that employee, in a gentle and sensitive way, but to explore if there is something that they need accommodation for. I see here just another question. What about an employee living with a high-risk patient? I think this is another situation that it could invoke a family status protection, but you would want to ask that employee for evidence or proof. So you would ask the employee for a letter from that family member's doctor saying that they can't live with someone who is taking transit or going into work or something like that. So that's another situation where you would be entitled to ask for evidence. And accommodations can be things like unpaid leaves. So you can give an employee, you can put an employee on an unpaid leave. You don't fire them is sort of the thing, right? So terminating someone in the face of, or because of, or even a little bit because of something, an accommodation that they need, would run afoul of the Human Rights Code. And the repercussions of not accommodating could be that the employee files an application with the Human Rights Tribunal or goes to a lawyer and sends you a demand letter for human rights damages. And that can be very time-consuming and expensive. I'm just going to go to the next slide. Yeah, so how can we accommodate human rights concerns? And I touched on this a little bit, but if you have an employee who has been working from home and you're looking to bring people back into the office, but they raise something like, well, I live with my mother and, she's high risk, that might be a situation where an appropriate accommodation would be to keep that employee working from home. And if that's working, that would be great. A leave, as I said, is another thing. Or where, you don't have to pay an employee if they're not working. So it could be an unpaid leave. Similarly, you can reduce or modify hours. And if your employee says they can only work 50% of the time right now, you only have to pay them for 50% of the time. So that's the accommodation. The Infectious Disease Emergency Leave. We've heard a lot about this, and there's kind of two streams of it here, but here I'm just going to talk about people who put their hand up and say, hey, I want to go on this leave. I need this leave right now. And this leave is for, it's a job protection under the Employment Standards Act. So you don't have to pay an employee who's on this leave. You just need to hold their job for them, and they need to be reinstated when they're ready to come back from the leave. And the leave is for people who are, for some reason, need to take a leave because of COVID-19. So it could be that they're in quarantine. It could be that they have to stay home with their kids where their daycare isn't open yet. It could be because they are ill. It could be because they're caring for someone who is ill. So when that leave is invoked, there is a prohibition on the employer from asking for a medical note, and that was designed just to not clog up the medical system, but the employer can still request evidence reasonable in the circumstances. So that could be in the event of a daycare closure, it could be a note from the daycare or something like that. So that's just something to look out for. And I'll turn it over to you, Danielle, for encouraging a positive working from home environment.
So there are a few things that employers can do to encourage a positive workplace. Something that we've heard of recently is the silent Zoom meeting, which can address feelings of isolation when employees are working from home. So it's basically just having a Zoom meeting. If you're a smaller team, or if you want to break up your employees into small teams and have them be on a Zoom meeting in silent mode, just so that they can see that they're not alone, they're working with others, and there's like that FaceTime. And you as the employer can see that your employees are there working. So they can address that.
Stop calling them.
Yeah, so you stop calling them. Virtual team buildings. There are a lot of things you can do to do some team building virtually. And just have check-ins. In our firm, we have our weekly file review call where we have a weekly call, and we can be updated on what everyone's doing and where things are at. And providing modified hours or flexible hours. Encouraging a positive workplace at the office. Turn it over to you, Hilary.
Yeah, so this is something that, as a lot of workplaces are returning to work, this is, I think, caused a lot of anxiety for employees and employers who are just concerned about being back in the office after, being told we need to isolate at home. If you could just go to the next slide, Danielle. So there is a fair amount of guidance from the Ontario government regarding what employers need to do in various sectors to ensure a safe working environment. And so, that guidance is all available online. We do recommend that you definitely put some thought into reopening the office and communicate that to employees so everyone knows how it's going to go. You can answer questions, before everyone shows up. So we recommend preparing some sort of a policy or a plan regarding how it's going to work. And that could include things like you can only enter through the front door where your temperature will be checked and you need to use hand sanitizer, or when you're in the elevator or common spaces, you need to be wearing a mask. Some offices we've seen have had to rearrange their workspaces or having employees come in on rotations so that the office isn't at full capacity. So maybe people are just coming in every other day and the cohorts are staying together. So there's lots of things that need to be considered, and employers should be flexible with that. I see we just got a couple more questions. I'll just try to answer. Is there a limit on duration for an unpaid leave as an accommodation? Not really. As long as the person's circumstances exist, and that accommodation is appropriate, it can last for a fairly long time. Similarly, with the Infectious Disease Emergency Leave, that will remain until those circumstances no longer remain, or until COVID-19 is no longer designated as an infectious disease under the regulations. But at some point, if it's going on for years, that may be a situation where the person's never going to come back, and we would determine that the contract would be frustrated at that point. What if a high-risk person doesn't want to return to the office after the pandemic once the office asks all the staff to return, considering that the employee cannot perform their job well from home forever? So if someone this is after the pandemic, so someone just wants to keep working from home forever. If they have a reason and that accommodation makes sense, so they have an ongoing disability concern, like maybe they have a mobility issue and your office is not accessible, as long as it's not meeting the undue hardship threshold, that may be a reasonable accommodation that the person works remotely. And I think what we're going to see is that while, where so many businesses have been working remotely and it's been going like pretty well for the most part, employers are going to have a hard time saying this is undue hardship. It's not working for us when you have that history of it actually working. And I mean, the employees maybe not performing 100%, but maybe that's a question of another accommodation, maybe reducing their hours or reducing their duties or something like that. Just another question. Do I have to provide a stand-up desk for an employee's home if they're having back issues working at their home desk? Our office is open. Should they want to come in and have their desk where they already have a stand-up desk? I would say no. I would say that you don't have to provide a stand-up desk.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would agree with that, Danielle.
No, I agree. If you want to, I mean, that's another thing, but I wouldn't say you're required to.
Mm-hmm. And here's another question. Can the unpaid leave you're describing be instigated by the employer? So in the case of just some sort of accommodation, the employer could suggest the accommodation be an unpaid leave if that's reasonable. So if the employees actually can't work at all, that would be a reasonable accommodation. If we're talking about the infectious disease emergencies leave, there is a way an employer can place an employee on that leave, and that would just be by basically laying them off. So reducing their hours, actually at this time deems that person to be on an infectious disease emergencies leave, which is unpaid. But with layoff, there does come a risk of constructive dismissal. So that's sort of another topic. You should watch our webinars on the infectious disease emergency leave for more on that. And we're almost out of time, so better keep going. So I guess next slide, Danielle.
Okay, so encouraging a positive workplace and employee morale. So like we mentioned, giving the option of working from home or at the office can be a great way to accommodate and increase employee morale. And being proactive. The reality is that, you know, employees will remember how you as their employer addressed things during this pandemic and how they were treated. And it will likely impact, you know, how loyal they are in the future, and it will impact employee morale. So it's, you know, it's a good idea to get ahead of issues and to factor workplace mental health when making decisions and deciding to accommodate employees. And, you know, providing leaves or part-time hours or flexible hours, showing that you're thankful and that you're grateful for their work and to them adapting to this crazy situation we're in. And navigating salary reductions. So a lot of employers have had to implement salary reductions, and that can be difficult on staff morale. And so in order to address that, you know, we recommend just having open and frank discussions with employees, letting them know, you know, keeping them updated on how the company's doing. And, you know, oftentimes when the higher ups are also getting salary reductions, it makes it more or a bit easier for employees to accept their own salary reductions. So just keeping them in the loop and making them feel part of the team and that you're grateful for them, you know, putting up with the situation. And finally, just modeling good habits. So, you know, as the employer, do you have the supports you need? Are you taking care of your own mental health? And are you seeking regular input and having productive discussions with your team? More suggestions are to have a designated person. So that might be helpful for your employees to have someone they can talk to about their concerns, mental health concerns or workplace concerns, and how to just be productive during this pandemic. Educating your workforce about mental health. Consider bringing a guest speaker or some form of educational event to open up the dialogue. So possibly it could even be just a YouTube video on mental health in the workplace, you know, just showing them that you're aware of this issue and you care and you're trying to be proactive in addressing it. That can go a long way. Allowing the space for discussion. And empowering employees to take control of their mental health themselves. Offering supports through their benefits. You know, if they get benefits, reminding them of what's available to them. You know, whether they have coverage for counseling or if they have an employee assistance program, reminding them of that. And then finally, having a plan to set up your employees for success. So really having a plan on, okay, how do I want to get ahead of these issues? How do I want to address these issues and really set them up for success so that, you know, everyone's happy, we can be productive and kind of just go through this as a team. So takeaways. The impacts of COVID-19 and workplace mental health are real. In addressing mental health in the workplace, employers can accommodate and do things to encourage a positive workplace. And that concludes today's Spring Forward legal update. We hope you will be...
A couple, there's a
Right,
couple
yeah.
more questions, I think. I mean, it is 11, so feel free to hop off if you want to, but we could just answer a couple more questions here. Are there legal implications of having a non-trained employee speak about mental health challenges and offering tips? They're not a medical professional. I would say no. I mean, if you're just sharing, I mean, if you're just encouraging a discussion, I don't think that would attract any liability for an employer.
Yeah,
you know, as long as just, this is a peer sharing and no one's an authority. We're not telling you have to do any of these things. If the employee quits after the unpaid leave has been suggested by the employer, is that considered a constructive dismissal? I mean, with the fact that this person is using the word suggested makes me think not, because, you know, if that was just a suggestion, this is one way we could accommodate you, then I think the employer was open to other ways. If the employee quits, generally they're just quitting. So in order for an employee to assert a constructive dismissal, they need to quit and say they're asserting a constructive dismissal. So if the employee has just quit and that's the end of it, likely that's not going to raise constructive dismissal. If an employer is somehow trying to force an employee to take an unpaid leave when the employee doesn't agree, and the employer does not have a contractual right to lay the employee off, that can be a constructive dismissal. So I think that's about it. So I guess we'll leave it there. Check out we have several webinars on COVID type topics that you can check out on our YouTube channel. And feel free to get in touch if you have any other questions or concerns. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.